Welcome back. Tonight we're diving deep into the vast African wilderness, where something ancient and deeply unsettling waits in the shadows of places humanity was never meant to explore. So this story takes us to the remote corners of Central and Southern Africa, where researchers, park rangers, and explorers have encountered phenomena that defy explanation. What you're about to hear are 4 documented incidents that occurred in some of Africa's most isolated locations. These aren't folklore or urban legends. These are verified accounts from official reports, research expeditions, and witness testimonies that have been buried in academic papers and government files for decades. The African wilderness spans over 20 million square kilometers of untamed land. From the endless sands of the Kalahari Desert to the impenetrable depths of the Congo Basin rainforest, there are places here that remain as mysterious today as they were 1,000 years ago. Places where modern technology fails, where GPS signals vanish, and where the very atmosphere seems to shift into something else. What makes these stories particularly chilling is how they've been systematically covered up or dismissed by authorities. Rangers who report strange incidents find themselves transferred to different posts. Research teams who document unexplained phenomena suddenly lose their funding. Local communities who have witnessed these events for generations are told their stories are culturally irrelevant to scientific discourse. But the evidence is there, scattered across declassified reports, abandoned research notes, and testimonies from those brave enough to speak. Tonight, we're bringing these incidents to light. Our first story comes from the Kalahari Desert, where in 1963, a geological survey team made a discovery that led to the mysterious disappearance of 3 researchers. The second takes us to Garamba National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where park rangers began reporting impossible sounds echoing from deep within the forest sounds that were later linked to a series of unexplained deaths. The third incident occurred in 2017 at a remote research station in the Congo Basin, where scientists studying the mysterious forest clearings called bayous encountered something that forced them to abandon their million-dollar research project overnight. And finally, we'll examine the case of Dr. Sarah M. Thembu, a South African wildlife biologist who went missing in Kruger National Park in 2019, leaving behind only a series of disturbing audio recordings that park authorities refused to release. These stories share common elements that can't be ignored: inexplicable technical failures, dramatic temperature drops in tropical environments, the complete silence of all wildlife in affected areas, and most disturbing of all, the presence of sounds that don't match any known animal or natural phenomenon. The African wilderness has always been a place where the boundary between the natural and supernatural becomes thin, but what these documented cases suggest is far more terrifying than ancient spirits or mythical creatures. They point to something that exists in the spaces between our understanding, something that watches, waits, and occasionally acts. So, turn off your lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for 4 true accounts of nightmare fuel discovered in the African wilderness. Because after tonight, you'll never look at those endless horizons quite the same way again. The darkness is calling. Let's answer. Dr. James Hendrick was sweating through his khaki shirt despite the morning chill when the radio crackled to life in their camp. October 15th, 1963 marked the 3rd week of the Anglo-South African Geological Survey's expedition into the most remote section of the Kalahari Desert. What they found there would lead to one of the most thoroughly suppressed incidents in African exploration history. The team had been following the controversial claims of William Leonard Hunt, better known as the Great Farini, who in 1885 reported discovering ancient ruins deep in the desert. For nearly 8 decades, expedition after expedition had searched for Farini's lost city, including 12 separate attempts by Joshua Haldeman, Elon Musk's grandfather. All had failed, but Hendrick's team possessed something the others didn't: newly developed seismic equipment that could detect underground structures. Base camp, we're getting readings that don't make sense. Dr. Margaret Thornfield radioed from their mobile unit. She was the team's lead archaeologist, a woman whose reputation for skeptical analysis had earned her respect across academic circles. The seismic patterns suggest a massive hollow space approximately 200 meters below the surface. It's geometrically perfect, too perfect for a natural cave system. The expedition consisted of 5 members: Hendrick as team leader, Thornfield, geologist Dr. Peter Voss, cartographer Samuel Krieger, and their guide, a local Khoi Khoi man named Coin. Zabu, who had lived in the region his entire life. Zabu had been reluctant to enter this particular area of the desert, speaking in hushed tones about a place his people called the ground that breathes. What happened over the next 3 days defies conventional explanation, yet it's all meticulously documented in the expedition's official reports that were immediately classified and remain sealed to this day. We know their contents only because Dr. Voss managed to smuggle out copies before his own mysterious death 6 months later. According to Voss's account, the seismic readings led them to a depression in the desert where the sand seemed different, darker, colder to the touch despite the blazing sun overhead. Thornfield's equipment began registering electromagnetic anomalies that grew stronger as they approached the center of the depression. Their compass spun wildly, refusing to settle on magnetic north. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in a matter of minutes, Voss wrote in his hidden journal. In the middle of the Kalahari, in October, we were watching our breath fog in the air. Zabu kept backing away, repeating the same phrase in his language. When I asked him to translate, he said, "The earth is hungry here." But it was the sounds that truly unnerved them. Starting on the second night, their equipment recorded what can only be described as breathing emanating from beneath the sand. Slow, rhythmic inhalations and exhalations that seemed to make the desert floor rise and fall in an almost imperceptible rhythm. The audio files, according to Voss, contained subsonic frequencies that made the entire team feel physically ill when played back. On the third morning, October 17th, Hendrik made the decision that would seal their fate. Against Zabu's increasingly frantic warnings, he ordered the team to begin excavation at the point where the electromagnetic readings were strongest. They dug for 6 hours, creating a pit nearly 3 meters deep when Krieger's shovel struck something hard. It wasn't stone. It wasn't metal. In Voss's words, the material felt organic, almost warm to the touch, but with a surface that seemed to shift under direct observation. When I tried to photograph it, the camera malfunctioned, producing only images of complete darkness regardless of the bright sunlight above. That night, Zabu vanished. His sleeping bag remained undisturbed, his possessions untouched, but the man himself was gone. No tracks led away from the camp, no struggle had occurred. He had simply ceased to exist between one moment and the next. The following morning brought the discovery that changed everything. Thornfield was the first to notice that the pit they had excavated was completely filled in, the sand perfectly level as if they had never dug at all. But worse, their equipment now detected that the hollow space below had grown larger, expanding outward in all directions. It was as if something had awakened, Voss wrote, as if our excavation had been accepted. The final entry in the expedition's official log, written in Hendrik's handwriting but with noticeably different penmanship, reads, "Research concludes, no significant findings. Returning to base immediately," but they never returned. 3 days after that final log entry, a search and rescue team found their camp completely abandoned. All equipment remained, food supplies were untouched, but Hendrik, Thornfield, and Krieger were nowhere to be found. The strangest detail: their sleeping bags showed no signs of disturbance, as if all three had simply evaporated while sleeping. Only Dr. Voss was discovered, found wandering 50 kilometers away with no memory of how he had gotten there and exhibiting signs of severe psychological trauma. His hair had turned completely white, and he spoke only in whispers for the remainder of his life. The official report blamed equipment failure and navigation errors for the expedition's problems. The area was immediately designated as off-limits to civilian research, a restriction that remains in place today. Satellite imagery of the region consistently shows nothing but empty desert, though local reports persist of strange lights and unexplained seismic activity. Dr. Voss spent his remaining months trying to warn others about what they had found. He died in his sleep exactly 6 months after the expedition, clutching a note that read, "It's still hungry. It's always been hungry. We just taught it how to hunt." The Kalahari keeps its secrets well, but sometimes, late at night when the desert wind howls across the endless dunes, locals say you can still hear the sound of the earth breathing, waiting for the next team of explorers to dig a little too deep into ground that was never meant to be disturbed. The electromagnetic interference started on March 3rd, 2018, exactly 1 week after Dr. Elena Rodriguez and her research team established their monitoring station deep within Garamba National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. What began as routine research into forest elephant communication patterns would evolve into one of the most disturbing documented incidents in modern conservation history. Rodriguez, a renowned acoustic ecologist from Barcelona University, had been studying elephant infrasonic communication for over a decade. Her team had placed an array of highly sensitive recording equipment throughout a 50-square-kilometer section of pristine Congo Basin rainforest, an area that local park rangers referred to as the Quiet Zone for its unusual lack of typical forest sounds. The research station was positioned 127 kilometers from the nearest human settlement, accessible only by helicopter or a grueling 3-day trek through terrain so dense that GPS signals were unreliable at best. The team consisted of Rodriguez, her graduate assistant Marcus Chen, sound engineer Priya Sharma, and 2 armed park rangers assigned for protection against poachers. From the moment we arrived, something felt wrong about this place, Chen would later write in his testimony to the university's ethics board. The normal symphony of forest life, birds, insects, monkeys was completely absent, not quiet, silent, as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. The team's sophisticated equipment, designed to detect and analyze elephant communications across vast distances, began registering anomalies within hours of deployment. Instead of the expected low-frequency rumbles of elephant communication, the sensors were picking up something else entirely: structured acoustic patterns that seemed to originate from deep within the earth itself. According to Rodriguez's research notes, the sounds followed a repeating cycle that occurred precisely every 47 minutes. The pattern began with a subsonic pulse too low for human ears to perceive, but powerful enough to register on their seismographs as minor earth tremors. This was followed by a series of what she described as organic metallic tones, frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature but were being produced by some unknown source beneath the forest floor. Priya Sharma, the team's sound engineer, became obsessed with analyzing these recordings. Her notes reveal a growing fascination that bordered on obsession. The harmonic complexity is impossible. It's as if someone took the sounds of every creature that ever lived in this forest and played them simultaneously, but processed through some kind of biological filter that shouldn't exist. On March 7th, Sharma made a discovery that terrified the entire team. While analyzing 4 days of accumulated audio data, she found that the mysterious sounds were slowly changing, becoming more complex and organized. But most disturbing was her realization that hidden within the acoustic patterns were echoes of their own voices. Conversations they had recorded during the day were being played back to them from beneath the ground, but altered in ways that made them barely recognizable. "It's learning," she wrote in her final log entry. "Whatever is producing these sounds, it's listening to us and incorporating our speech patterns into its own vocalizations. It's trying to communicate." The psychological effects on the team were immediate and severe. Chen reported chronic nightmares filled with sounds he couldn't describe. Rodriguez began experiencing auditory hallucinations, hearing her name called from the forest in voices that sounded almost, but not quite, like her family members back in Spain. The park rangers, experienced men who had spent years in the African wilderness, became increasingly agitated and refused to patrol more than 100 meters from the research station. But it was on March 10th that the situation escalated beyond mere atmospheric disturbance into active terror. That morning, the team discovered that their equipment had recorded something during the night that defied explanation. 6 hours of continuous audio, featuring what appeared to be dozens of human voices speaking in a language none of them recognized, yet somehow understanding every word. The voices spoke of hunger, of waiting, of joy at having visitors after so very long. They spoke of the researchers by name, describing their childhoods, their fears, their deepest secrets. They spoke of others who had come before expeditions and research teams dating back decades, all absorbed into what they called the memory of the forest. Rodriguez immediately ordered the team to pack up and evacuate, but their extraction helicopter couldn't reach them due to sudden severe weather that seemed to localize directly over their position. For 3 days, they were trapped in the research station while the sounds from below grew louder and more insistent. Chen's account describes the final night. "The voices were no longer coming from our equipment. They were coming from everywhere: the trees, the ground, the air itself. They were calling to us individually, using the voices of people we loved. Priya started walking toward the forest, saying her mother was calling for her. We had to physically restrain her." When the extraction helicopter finally reached them on March 14th, they found the research station intact, but the team in a state of severe psychological distress. All of their equipment had been destroyed, not damaged by weather or wildlife, but methodically dismantled as if by intelligent hands. The memory cards containing their recordings were completely blank, despite being sealed in waterproof containers. Most disturbing was Sharma's condition. She had developed a form of selective mutism, speaking only in whispers and only when directly questioned. Her final statement to investigators was chilling. It wanted us to stay. It promised we would never be alone again, never be forgotten. The forest remembers everyone who enters. It keeps them. Their voices become part of the song. The official report blamed equipment failure and psychological stress caused by isolation. The research area was immediately closed to all scientific activities, officially due to increased poaching activity, though no evidence of poachers was ever found. Satellite monitoring of the region shows normal forest canopy, but local people report that the area remains completely devoid of wildlife. Rodriguez was quietly forced into early retirement. Chen changed his field of study to urban acoustics and refuses to discuss the expedition. Sharma spent 6 months in psychiatric care before disappearing entirely. Her family reports that she occasionally calls them, but when they answer, they hear only forest sounds and distant voices calling her name. Park rangers still patrol the perimeter of the former research area, but they report that their radios malfunction when they get too close. The electromagnetic interference continues, growing stronger each year. And sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, rangers claim they can hear new voices joining the underground chorus voices, speaking Spanish, Mandarin, and Hindi, welcoming visitors to stay forever in the memory of the forest. The equipment may have been destroyed, but the sounds remain. Waiting, listening, learning, growing stronger with each person who discovers that some silences are more terrifying than any scream. Dr. Sarah Mthembu was arguably South Africa's most respected wildlife biologist when she entered Kruger National Park's remote Pafuri section on August 14, 2019. 3 days later, she would become the center of the most suppressed missing person case in the park's 125-year history. The only evidence of what happened to her is a series of audio recordings that park authorities refuse to release, recordings that suggest her disappearance was far from accidental. Mthembu had come to Pafuri to investigate reports from park rangers about unusual wildlife behavior in the area. Animals were abandoning traditional territories, migration patterns had become erratic, and several rangers reported encountering aggressive elephants that showed no fear of humans' behavior, completely contrary to established elephant psychology. The Department of Environmental Affairs had quietly commissioned her to determine if the disruptions were connected to increased poaching activity or climate change effects. What she found was something else entirely. Mthembu's research methodology was meticulous. She carried advanced audio recording equipment that operated continuously, capturing both her verbal observations and ambient sound from the environment. These recordings, automatically uploaded to university servers via satellite link, provide a chilling timeline of her final 3 days in the African wilderness. The first audio logs, timestamped August 14th at 15:30, document normal arrival procedures. Mthembu's voice is confident and professional as she describes setting up her remote camp near the Luvuvu River, approximately 47 kilometers from the nearest ranger station. Her initial observations note the unusual silence of the area, no bird calls, no insect sounds, no evidence of the diverse wildlife the region was known for. The ecosystem here appears to be in a state of extreme stress, she recorded. I've documented similar patterns in areas affected by drought or disease, but weather conditions are normal and I've found no evidence of illness in the limited wildlife I've observed. It's as if the animals have simply left. By day 2, Mthembu's tone had changed noticeably. Her voice carried an edge of confusion and growing concern as she documented discoveries that challenged her understanding of animal behavior. Fresh elephant tracks led in perfect straight lines towards specific locations, unlike the meandering patterns of natural foraging. Even more disturbing, the tracks showed that multiple herds had converged on a central point, approximately 10 kilometers into the wilderness, an area local rangers had always avoided. The track patterns suggest coordinated movement toward a specific destination, she recorded on August 15th at 8:45. But elephants don't behave this way. They don't abandon diverse foraging areas to gather in a single location unless driven by extreme circumstances. I'm proceeding to the convergence point to determine what's drawing them there. The audio from that afternoon captures the moment Mthembu discovered what the elephants had been seeking. Her breathing becomes labored, and her voice drops to a whisper as she describes finding hundreds of animal skeletons arranged in concentric circles around a natural depression in the ground. The bones weren't scattered by scavengers, they were carefully positioned, with different species sorted into distinct rings radiating outward from the center. "This is intentional placement," she whispered into her recorder. "Elephants in the outer ring, then buffalo, then smaller antelope species, and something else in the center. The bones are old, some possibly decades, but they've been maintained, arranged." The elephant bones show tool marks, precise cuts that suggest intelligence beyond simple scavenging. But it was what she discovered at the center of the bone circles that transformed her scientific investigation into something far more sinister. Her audio logs describe finding human remains, park rangers' uniforms, equipment, and identification tags dating back to the 1990s. The remains were arranged with the same careful precision as the animal bones and showed evidence of the same deliberate tool marks. "The missing rangers," she recorded, her voice barely audible. "They didn't disappear in poaching incidents or animal attacks. They were collected, brought here, arranged like specimens in some kind of display. But by what? What intelligence is capable of this kind of systematic behavior?" The audio from that evening captures Mthembu's growing terror as she realized she was not alone in the wilderness. Her equipment recorded sounds that shouldn't exist in nature, mechanical clicking that seemed to come from the trees above, rhythmic tapping that emerged from the ground below, and most disturbing of all, sounds that mimicked her own voice calling for help from various directions around her camp. "Something is imitating my distress calls," she whispered into her recorder at 23:47 on August 15th. "The vocalizations are perfect copies of my voice, but they're coming from multiple locations simultaneously. I've counted at least 6 different positions around my perimeter. Whatever is producing these sounds has been listening to me, learning my speech patterns, and now it's using them to what? Lure me away from camp?" The final complete recording, timestamped August 16th at 6:15, documents Mthembu's decision to attempt immediate evacuation despite being 2 days from the nearest ranger station. Her voice carries barely controlled panic as she describes the discovery that her satellite communication equipment had been sabotaged during the night, not damaged by weather or animals, but methodically dismantled with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of electronic systems. "The equipment was disassembled by something with human-level intelligence," she recorded. "Every component was carefully removed and arranged in patterns similar to the bone circles. This wasn't random destruction, it was deliberate communication. Something is trying to tell me that I can't leave." The next series of recordings are fragmented and increasingly disturbing. Mthembu's voice becomes strained as she documents being systematically herded away from escape routes by coordinated animal movements. Elephants blocked paths to the south, buffalo herds appeared to cut off eastern routes, and predators made their presence known whenever she attempted to move west toward the ranger station. "They're working together," she gasped into her recorder during one fragmented transmission. "The animals. They're following instructions. Something is directing them, coordinating their movements to keep me contained. This isn't natural behavior, this is intelligence, directing animal resources like tools." The final clear recording, timestamped August 16th at 1933, captures the moment Mthembu realized the true nature of what she had discovered. Her voice is eerily calm as she describes encountering what she calls the conductor, an entity she observed directing animal behavior through sounds and gestures that the creatures responded to with immediate compliance. "It's been watching me since I arrived," she recorded. "Learning about me, studying my behavior the same way I study animals. The bone circles aren't just displays, they're research specimens. This place is a laboratory and I've become the next subject for observation and collection." The audio quality deteriorates significantly in the final recordings, with increasing levels of static and interference that make Mthembu's words difficult to understand. But her final clear statement, recorded at 21:47 on August 16th, provides the most chilling evidence of what happened in the Pafari wilderness. "Is offering me a choice. I can join the collection willingly, become part of the research, and my consciousness will be preserved in some way I don't understand. Or I can resist and end up arranged in the bone circles like the others. It's showing me memories, experiences from previous subjects, the rangers who disappeared, the researchers who never returned. They're still here, somehow, still aware, still contributing to its understanding of human behavior. The recording cuts off abruptly at 21:52. Mthembu's equipment continued transmitting static for another 6 hours before the signal was lost entirely. The search and rescue operation, launched after Mthembu failed to check in, found her campsite completely abandoned but undisturbed. All of her equipment was present and functional, her supplies were untouched, and there were no signs of struggle or violence. Most puzzling to investigators was that her audio recording equipment was found arranged in a perfect circle, each device positioned at mathematically precise intervals around her abandoned tent. The official report concluded that Mthembu had become disoriented and wandered into the wilderness, where she likely succumbed to exposure or animal attack. Her body was never recovered despite extensive searches involving helicopters, tracking dogs, and thermal imaging equipment. But park rangers who participated in the search report strange experiences that never made it into official documentation. Equipment malfunctions that occurred only in specific locations, animal behavior that seemed designed to misdirect search efforts, and most disturbing of all, recordings of Mthembu's voice calling for help from areas that had already been thoroughly searched. The Pafuri section was quietly closed to researchers and tourists, officially due to increased poaching activity. But satellite monitoring shows that animal behavior in the region has become increasingly organized and purposeful. New bone circles have appeared, larger and more complex than those Mthembu documented, suggesting that whatever intelligence operates in that wilderness is growing stronger and more sophisticated. And sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, park rangers monitoring the closed area report receiving radio transmissions that sound like Dr. Sarah Mthembu providing detailed behavioral observations about species unknown to science, observations that describe human behavior patterns with the clinical detachment of a researcher studying fascinating but ultimately disposable subjects. The recordings exist, the evidence is documented, but the truth remains buried in classified files that will never see public release. Because acknowledging what really happened to Dr. Sarah Mthembu would mean accepting that somewhere in the African wilderness there exists an intelligence that sees humanity not as the dominant species, but as the next specimen for collection. The wilderness is still out there, still watching, still collecting data on every person who enters its domain. And sometimes, late at night when the wind carries sounds across vast distances, you can hear it calling in voices. You recognize voices of people who thought they were studying nature, only to discover that nature had been studying them all along.